25 years ago, the world watched as students from Beijing's Central Academy of Fine Arts unveiled the replica of the Statue of Liberty in Tiananmen Square. It was an amazing sight to behold, this enduring symbol of liberty standing face to face with the dictator Mao Zedong's portrait. It was a moment when we all dreamed that the Tiananmen Square demonstrations would become a triumph for freedom and democracy. Unfortunately, China's communist leaders sought to hang on to power through force. They sent tanks and soldiers into Beijing to, quote, clear the square on the evening of June 3rd and into June 4th. The beating, the bayoneting, the torture and murder of students and the ubiquitous display of tanks turned the dream of freedom into a bloody nightmare. We have with us today 5 extraordinary witnesses to this tragic scene in world history, not just witnesses, but key players in the push for democracy in the People's Republic of China. These individuals are reminding us today, as they have so tenaciously since their exile, that the events of Tiananmen Square will never fade from memory, and they remind us of the longing for freedom that remains within the Chinese people. This week and next, we want to remember the extraordinary sacrifice endured by hundreds of thousands of peaceful Chinese democracy activists. Some may prefer, particularly in the business community and some politicians, to look past or to even trivialize the slaughter of innocents by Chinese soldiers. But the memory of the dead and those arrested, those who were tortured and exiled, requires us to honor them, respect their noble aspirations for fundamental freedoms, and recommit ourselves to the struggle for freedom and human rights in China. The government of China continues to go to astounding lengths to erase the memory of the Tiananmen demonstrations and their violent suppression. The Internet is censored. Citizens holding private discussions or public commemorations are harassed and detained. And we still have no account by the government of those who died, those arrested, those disappeared, or those executed. It is my promise, and I'm joined by many of my distinguished colleagues in the House and Senate, that we will always remember, always, Tiananmen, as long as the Chinese people especially cannot discuss its significance openly without harassment or arrest. When the tanks rolled down the square on June 4th, 1989, all of China suffered. Mothers lost sons, fathers lost daughters, and China lost an idealistic generation of future leaders. China's loss, from one point of view, could be seen as America's gains. Our witness today, exiles and refugees from their native land, have contributed mightily to the American fabric. Out of tragedy and disillusionment, they have created lives that make America stronger. They are entrepreneurs and pastors, business people and academics, members of the military and civil society leaders. The Chinese government may call them criminals and hooligans, a horrible slander, but one day soon they will be called heroes. They already are heroes, but the people in China will recognize that they are truly remarkable heroes. The people testifying here today are also extraordinary people of conscience and are all advocates for freedom and human rights, such as Chen Guangzhen and Harry Wu and Wei Jingshang, and a list of people. It's like the who's who of the best and the greatest and the most courageous the world has ever seen. There will always be those who want to downplay human rights in relations with China. But the people here today remind us that the people of China suffered for freedom. They bled for liberty and demanded justice, democracy, and an end to widespread corruption. These demands were made 25 years ago. They were made with a great deal of dignity and respect, and they were treated with harshness and murder. And they still, 25 years later, can fire the imagination of the people of China. More than ever, the U.S. needs a robust human rights diplomacy with China. It's been lacking, sorely lacking. We need policies that actively promote human rights, freedom of speech, internet freedom, and the rule of law. We must support the advocates for peaceful change and the champions of liberty, and clearly signal our support for those seeking rights and freedoms for all of China's citizens, not only for those seeking to pad the economic bottom line. Such leadership is needed now because China is in the midst of a severe crackdown on human rights advocates and freedom of speech. Last year was the worst year since the 1990s for arrests and imprisonment of dissidents. At least 230 people have been detained for their human rights advocacy, on top of all the others who are languishing in the Laogai and in detention throughout the country. In the past month, Beijing has detained 2 more dozen activists for simply seeking to commemorate the Tiananmen anniversary in private. And China remains one of the worst offenders of human rights overall. It remains the torture capital of the world. I'll never forget reading Manfred Nowak, the Special Rapporteur for China's report on torture in China. It was horrific. If you're arrested, if you're a dissident or a religious believer, you will, not maybe, you will be tortured. Religious freedom abuses continue with impunity, and ethnic minority groups face repression when they peacefully seek rights to their culture and language. Hundreds of millions of women have been forced to abort their precious babies because of a draconian attempt to limit population growth. China's one-child per couple policy is a demographic and human rights disaster that has no parallel in human history. The prevalence for having boys has led to gender imbalance and a mass extermination of baby girls. This is not only a massive gender crime, but a security problem as well. Experts are coming to the conclusion that China's gender imbalance will and already is leading to crime, social instability, worker shortages, and there's been a huge spike in human trafficking. I'm the prime sponsor of the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, our landmark law here in the United States to combat sex and labor trafficking. Last year, and it should have been done much sooner, China was put on Tier 3, egregious violator when it comes to human trafficking. And the major magnet for all of that is the fact of the missing daughters, systematically exterminated since 1979. And there are tens of millions of girls gone, exterminated, killed because of sex selection, abortion. And now because of that, men can't find wives. There's a huge gender imbalance, so the traffickers have rolled into China as never before to sell brides and to sell women as commodities. And there also is the possibility, and we've had testimony here at previous committees I've chaired, where it could even lead to war because of the instability that the one-child per couple policy has bred. Despite the country's stunning economic growth over the past 2 decades, Beijing leaders still remain terrified of their own people. China's ruling Communist Party would rather stifle, imprison, or even kill its own people than to defer to their demands for freedom and rights. Repression has not dimmed the desires of the Chinese people for freedom and reform. There is an inspiring drive in China to keep fighting for freedom under the very difficult and dangerous situations and conditions. As our witness today will surely attest, the United States must demonstrate clearly and robustly that democratic reforms and human rights are critical to their national interests, to the global national interests, and our own. We want to see a more democratic China, one that respects human rights and is governed by the rule of law, because a more democratic China will be productive and peaceful rather than a strategic and hostile competitor. The future also should be in China's interests, this future, because there is a growing evidence that the most prosperous and stable societies are those that protect religious freedom, the freedom of speech, and the rule of law. I believe that someday China will be free. The people of China will be able to enjoy all of their God-given human rights. As the nation of free Chinese men and women and the nation of free Chinese women and men will honor, they will applaud, and they will celebrate the heroes of Tiananmen Square and those who sacrificed so much over the years. And the people at this table, the true heroes, will be honored mightily and forever in China because they sacrificed so much. I'd like to yield to Mr. Pittenger for comments he might have.